Welcome to chapter 27 of the book of Acts, continuing now with Paul in his journey eventually to Rome in front of Caesar. And he's being sent away by Festus and being acquitted by Herod Agrippa II and his sister Bernice, but Festus already made the decision to send him, and so off he goes. And here we'll join the procession in verse 1, and it says, "And when it was decided for us to sail away unto Italy, they delivered up both Paul and certain other prisoners to a centurion by name Julius, of the cohort of Augustus." Italian, it doesn't say to Rome, but they sailed for Italy. And there was a centurion, Julius, of the cohort Spiris, aspire. The Roman troops, as they walked in line, formed what they called a spire, a long line of troops, maybe 4 or 5 wide, going down the road, and that's where they came. A cohort is the word in the English it has used, and Savastis is not Augustus, but it is the Greek word for the royal one, the king, and not the king, but the person that was highly regarded, and the Savastis. Maybe I could have picked a different word instead of Augustus, but this is basically who was the ruler at that time, so I did use Augustus, Caesar Augustus. And having set foot in a boat of Adramyttium, being about to sail the places along Asia, we embarked. Topography is the derivative. And with Aristarchus of Macedonia of Thessalonica being with us, and the us is probably Luke, who wrote the book of Acts and the book of Luke. So they're taking off from Caesarea. We'll go to the map in a second. And in the other day, we led down into Sidon. Okay, we'll go there now. And here we are. And so they're in Caesarea. They hit Sidon. Now they're going to go around Cyprus over to Myra. And in the other day we led down into Sidon, and Julius, kindly treating Paul, permitted him going to his friends to attain care in Sidon. Paul had friends because he was there before and mentions. And from there, embarking, we sailed under Cyprus, and I mentioned that, I showed that to you, because of the winds being adverse. Anemus, anemometer, is a instrument that measures wind speeds. And in the Pelagos, the pelagic, the open sea, the deep sea, along Cilicia and Pamphylia, having sailed, we went down unto Myra of Lycia. And there, the centurion, having found a boat of Alexandria, sailing to Italy. Alexandria was in Egypt, but that was where the boat was from. It's sailing to Italy. He boarded us onto it. Now, these are fairly large boats, because it mentions later there was like close to 300 people. And in a fit amount of days, sailing slowly and hardly coming near Cnidus, the wind not allowing us further, we sailed under Crete. So we'll go back up to the map. And here we are in Crete. We sailed under Crete. And we went by Salome, and they end up here in Fair Havens. They go by Rhodes. And the wind wouldn't allow, and the wind is probably coming this direction, so they had to sail off. I sailed for years, and so I know a little bit about it. If the wind is going directly from my point here all the way across, you can't sail directly across into it, because the sails weren't designed for tacking very well, which means sailing into the wind to close to a 45-degree angle. So what you tack, you would go this way and then you go this way. The newer boats, you can do that, but even in those boats, I'm not sure how much they were able to tack. They were able to do it a little bit, but not much. So when they let off here, then the wind was here and it was on the side of the boat, so they were able to sail real well down below Crete. And hardly sailing along it, we came to a certain place being called Good Harbors, which was near the city of Lasea, and that was on there on Crete. And a fit amount of chronou, time, chronology is a derivative, having elapsed, and being already a dangerous voyage, because also the fasting already went by, Paul earnestly advised, saying to them, Men, I contemplate that with damage and much loss, not only of the load of cargo and of the boat, but also the voyage is about to be of our lives. That is, they could lose their lives. So it's a cargo ship that they were on. But the centurion was persuaded by the navigator and the shipmaster rather than the things having been being said by Paul. So the ship had a shipmaster, it was a captain probably, and then the navigator who navigated the way where they were going to go, and they decided to do what they were going to do. And the existing harbor being unsuitable for wintering, that's probably because the wind was blowing into it and would wash the boats ashore in the bay, the more they made counsel to embark from there. That was at Twin Harbors, and if by any means they might be able, arriving at Phoenix, to pass the winter, which is a harbor of Crete, looking towards the southwest and towards the northwest. So the entrance was safe to go in because the wind wasn't blowing directly up into the bay. We'll go again and we'll show that. Now here is Phoenix is up here, and they were in Fair Havens, and they went up into Lasea. So they were going to make it up here because then this harbor was protected from this wind coming. So they headed off over here, and they go by Clauda, where things start to get exciting for them. And so it's looking towards the northwest. And blowing gently south, thinking the purpose to have been reached. So now they're heading south with this wind sailing on a close haul. Having lifted off, they sail close by Crete. But not long after, a stormy wind shot by it, being called Evroklidon in the Greek, Euroclydon, probably had to do with Europe, the word. This is what it was called. On Southern California, I lived down there, they had the Santa Ana winds, which came off the desert. So a lot of places have winds that they name, give them names, and here was Euroclydon. And the boat being seized with force and not being able to tack into the wind, giving up, we bore off. And running under some small island, being called Clauda, we were hardly able to control the skiff. Now we're at that. Now we're at there where we had Clauda. So here it is here. So they had to drop off, and they're going by Clauda. Which having taken up, they employed helps, undergirding the boat, and fearing lest they should fall off into the Syrtis Gulf, letting down the rigging. Thus they were borne along. So they saw that they were in trouble. So they took out the little boat, and they had ropes that they would tie around that would get it under the boat, pull it up on the other side, and tie it around the boat. Undergirding, and do this in probably many places with these heavy hemp ropes so the boat wouldn't get torn apart. And they were worried that they should fall off into the Syrtis Gulf. So they let down the rigging more or less. They didn't have any sails up. Now they were just being borne along by the wind pushing against the hull of the boat. The Syrtis Gulf is the Gulf of Sidra in Libya today. This is the type of boat that they were probably on, 200 or 300 people. And the Gulf of Sidra is right down here. You can see it. Their Crete is up here, and they were going across. So if they went down into this gulf, it was very shallow and wide, and very dangerous place to be, because if you ran aground out here 50 or 70 miles from land, nobody would see you. They wouldn't know it. You wouldn't be able to get off of the sand because you ran aground out there, and it was a very dangerous. I guess a lot of boats were lost back at that time, and so they were worried about that. And so then they were now being carried along by this wind. And it says, and vehemently with our being tossed by the storm, on the next day an expulsion of cargo was made. Well, they had this heavy load, and if it gets pushed to one side or the other, then it can capsize the boat. I live in right on a fishing village, Newport, Oregon, and the boats that go off carry these crab pots, and they can go up 15 or 20 feet above the boat. Well, if all of a sudden, and it's very dangerous, so they put these outriggers on to stabilize the boat. They stick out, and so the boat, if it started to tip over, these would hit the water and so forth. And so if you have a lot of cargo and it shifts to one side, then the boat will just flip right over. So they didn't want that to happen. They made an expulsion, and it was of the cargo. And the third day, with our own hands, we tossed out the rigging of the boat. The tri is 3. Avtohieres, chiropractor, the hieres is the hands, and avto is self, like automatic. Here is autohieres. With our own hands, we tossed out the rigging of the boat. So now the rigging is what pulls the shrouds up, the sails up, and they probably threw out the sails and everything to make it lighter. So now they're not going to be able to go anywhere. Maybe they kept a few of the sails, possibly. And neither sun nor stars were appearing for many days. Helium is a derivative for the sun, and astron, aster, is a star. Astrology, derivatives. And not a small distress was placed upon us. That means it was a big distress. And all remaining hope was removed for us to be preserved. And there's the word soziste, or to be saved. It could be, you could say that here. It would be saved are delivered in this place right here. But if you use saved, it's not really saved as far as their spirits, anything like that. It's just to be their lives were saved. So I use the word preserved. Saved is only used a few times for another word, for this 4982, but it's like if you were saved from drowning, if it was something that happened right away and you were saved from drowning, then I use that word. But generally, the word delivered is used because it's an ongoing process, and it's used that way in the future tense many places, and in the as a participle, giren, with an ing being, ing, saved. And a long lack of food existing, then Paul, standing in their midst, said, the meso, middle, midst, mesoderm, the middle skin. Indeed, it behooved you, O men, having yielded obedience to me, to not have embarked from Crete, so as to gain this damage and the loss. And at present I earnestly advise you, be cheerful, for not one life will be cast off from you, except the boat. For there stood beside me in this night, nocturnal nicti, an angel, angelos, of God, theou, theology, the derivative, of whom I am, and in whom I serve, saying, fear not, Paul, phobou, the phobia, derivative. Caesarea say, you must stand before. Caesar, you must stand before, and behold, God has granted to you all the ones sailing with you. Therefore be cheerful, men, for I believe in God, that so it will be in which manner it has been spoken to me. So he's giving them hope. But onto a certain island we must fall. And when the 14th night came to pass, 2 weeks out in this storm, boy, I was out in a storm one day, in my sailboat, 22-foot sailboat, and the seas were way up. My boat would go up to the top, and then I would pull the rudder, and I would go over the side, go way down, then come way back up again. And just to control the boat, it was just, and I was young, and I was just beat. And so 14 nights of this, I can't imagine. It sounds like, oh, well, they're just in a boat sitting around laying down. But it's scary. And I'm sure being scared in 2 weeks, so that's a long time. You don't know if you're going to drown or not. And the 14th night came to pass, we being carried about in the Adriatic. So they were in between Greece and Italy and the Mediterranean. Towards the middle of the night, the seamen suspected some region neared them. And having sounded, they found it 20 fathoms. Sounding, Mark Twain, that was in the riverboat, they would throw these ropes with stones, and they would go to the ground, and then they would have marking on the rope on how deep it is. I guess Twain was probably 2 fathoms. I would think that's what it was. A fathom is 6 feet, so that would have been 12 feet, Mark Twain. And but here they found it 20 fathoms, so 6 times 20 is 120? 2, 4, 6, 8, 10. Yeah, 120 feet. And they sounded, and they found, and then a short time having elapsed, and again having sounded, they found it 15 fathoms. That's 45 feet. So they knew that they were going up. Something was coming, was higher, hopefully an island. And fearing perhaps they should fall into rough topos, topography is on maps. They tossed 4 anchors from out of the stern. So they probably, they took these little boats out, and they had the anchor in the boat, and they went out maybe 4 times, and far as they could. And then like the boat's here, and so they go out and they drop the anchor down, so the boat is being held from going anywhere. 4 anchors would hold the boat. Even one good anchor today would hold a giant boat. But that's what they did, and their vowing day to come. And the seamen, seeking to flee from out of the boat, fevgin, a fugitive is a derivative, and having let down the skiff into the sea with an excuse as to stretch out, to stretch out the anchors from the prow, Paul said. So they went out on these boats, and their excuse was to take the anchor out and then drop the anchor, but they were going to cut it loose, and off they would go in these little skiffs to safety and leave the people in the boat to the ocean waves. And Paul said to the centurion and to the stratiotes, a strategy, it's a derivative, if these do not stay in the boat, you will not be able to be preserved. Then the soldiers cut off the lines of the skiff. So this little skiff went out, and they had a line so they could drag it back in if they had to, get these people back on the boat in this little skiff. So they let the skiffs out without the people on them, and they cut the line. So the skiffs were and allowed it to fall off of the skiff. One. So this little boat now was off on its own, nobody on it, crashing ashore. And until day was about to come, Paul appealed for all to share in nourishment, saying, today is the 14th day. You continue expecting without eating, having taken nothing to yourselves. Therefore I appeal to you to take trophies, nourishment, trophy. Atrophy is not having food. For this exists for your deliverance. For not one hair of yours shall fall from out of your head. Trichinosis, a disease of the hair. Cephalis is cephalic, has to do with the head, derivatives. And having said these things, and having taken bread, he gave thanks to God. Eucharistise, the Eucharist is the word we have for giving thanks to God before all. And having broken, he began to eat. And all, having become cheerful, also they took nourishment, trophies. And we in the boat were all 276 souls. So this is a big boat to handle 275 people, probably rowers, and then people working the sails, and then the convicts, and all the cargo in there. They found ships way larger than this that the Romans had built, gigantic ships, and they were able to build these and use them. There's a lot on the internet about that. You can go to Roman ships. And being satisfied with nourishment, they lightened the boat, casting out the grain into the cetone. The parasite is a parasite, something next to the grain. A parasite eats the grain. They cast out basically the food that they had now into the sea. It might have been, I don't know how many bags it could have been, but they're gone now. And when it became day, they did not recognize the gain, the land. Geology is a derivative for land. But they contemplated a certain bay having a shore, on which they consulted if they are able to thrust the boat. So they see this little sandy beach, and they're hoping to get to it. And having removed the anchors and cut them off with an axe or with a knife, they gave up into the sea, together unfastening the tillers of the rudder. So they gave up into the sea, and the anchors, they unfastened the tiller. The tiller was a handle that you pulled one way or the other, and the rudder, it moved it would determine which direction the boat would be going, by which way you pull a rudder. It's like a horse. If you pulled it to the right or the left, and same with the rudder, it would change the direction of the hull of the boat, the direction it would go. So they unfastened the tillers, two of them. So they had some type of a setup where they had two, probably together with a rudder in between, the top of the rudder, which extended above the boat. And having lifted up the mainsail, now I guess they couldn't get the rudder that's probably built on the bottom of the boat there, and they couldn't get it loose, but the rudder would get stuck, because that stuck way down further than the bottom of the hull, maybe half again as deep as the depth of the boat. And having lifted up the mainsail to the blow, so now see, they still have one sail left, the mainsail. They held for the shore. So now everything is gone. There's no steering. They just put the mainsail up, and the wind was blowing the direction towards the beach, so they knew that it would push them into the beach. Hopefully, it wouldn't push them over sideways to the left or right, where there may have been rocks, and then they hit the rocks, and then they'd be in big trouble. But this is what they did. And having fallen into a place between two seas, they ran the ship aground. And the prow, that's the front of the boat, having stuck, remained unshaken. The proa is a transliteration. But the stern, that's the rear end of a ship, was loose by the force of the waves. And the soldiers' plan was that they should kill the prisoners, lest any swimming should have escaped. Now here we see this was with the Philippian jailer was going to commit suicide because he thought the people after the earthquake in the jail that would have fled, and he was going to kill himself. So losing your prisoner was, in any circumstances, I guess, was a death sentence. So they would rather kill them than have them themselves be killed. But the centurion, wanting to save Paul, restrained them of their will. And he bid the ones able to swim, columvarian is a swimming, a pool, an indoor columvarium to swim in, having thrown themselves off first, to exit unto the land, and the rest, some indeed upon planks and others upon some other things from the boat. So they all were trying to float ashore and, using their hands and grabbing hold of wood and sitting on top of it and using another plank to use it as a row, an oar, and however, all these almost 300 people were all swimming for their lives. And so it came to pass, all came through safe unto the land. So they're all on this island, and we'll go more into the 28th chapter of where they ended up and what happens to them. And I hope you'll join us in chapter 28, and God bless.